My wife is a Hoosier. That means she's from Indiana. She's a proud New Yorker now, but she was born in the cornfields of the flatlands, where you can travel for 1,000 miles west without encountering nary a hill. Now, I was born in the hills of Cincinnati. And Cincinnati, like Rome, is situated on 7 hills. In fact, they call them mounts. Mount Adams, Mount Auburn. There's something about mountains that defy human attempts to tame them. You can cultivate the prairies, you can plant them and plow them, but a mountain seems to stand in opposition to human authority. Some years ago, there was a rock and roller from Indiana who had a great song that I just loved. It went like this: I fight authority, authority always wins. I did love that song because I saw myself as oppositional, as someone who stood against all traditional forms of authority. Of course, I was a child of the 60s. In the 60s, we were taught question authority. Now that's just a bumper sticker. But us kids of the 60s saw the assassination of Dr. King, of JFK and Bobby Kennedy. In 1970, we saw 4 Kent State University students shot to death while protesting. We witnessed a very unpopular war where 58,000 Americans' lives were taken. Questioning authority wasn't just a slogan, it was a necessity. And I integrated that into my young life as a rebel. But then I went to Princeton Seminary, and I became an authority, at least an authority on all things religious. I was ordained a United Methodist clergy person. I knelt on an altar made out of a tree that the great historical personage John Wesley preached under. And back in the day, I used to wear clergy vestments on a Sunday morning to show my congregation I really knew what I was talking about. I was an authority. But most of all, I was the father to 2 teenage boys for many years. I fight authority. Authority always wins. No, I became the authority. John Mellencamp, who wrote and sang that song, even had a verse for me. I call up the preacher. I say, give me strength for round 5. He says, you don't need to fight, you need to grow up, son. I said, growing up sounds like growing old and dying to me don't sound like all that much fun. Max Weber, the German sociologist, once posited that there are 3 kinds of authority. There's traditional authority, the authority of kings, the authority of the church, the authority of tradition and cultural structures. And then there's legal authority, the authority of the United States Constitution. But there's the 3rd kind of authority, he said, that defies easy classification. He called it charismatic authority. Now, charismatic authority doesn't derive from those traditional sources. On this Sunday, Jesus stands with his disciples on a mount in the last section of St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, and he says to them, all authority has been given to me. By that he means he wasn't born into it. It wasn't conferred on him by his parents. It wasn't bequeathed by his culture. He didn't earn it in an academic sense. His authority came from a higher source. There's a great story about Bill Bradley, a great American. And Bill Bradley goes to a state dinner. And while he's there, he finds he needs some butter for his dinner rolls. So he calls the waiter over and says, "May I have more butter?" The waiter says, "I'm sorry, sir, there's only 1 plate of butter for every table." Bradley says, "Well, that may be the case, but I need more butter. Could you bring me some butter?" And again, the waiter says, "Sir, there's only 1 plate of butter allotted for each table. I'm sorry." Now, Bill Bradley wasn't a self-absorbed person, but in tongue-in-cheek, He said to the waiter, "Do you know who I am? I'm a United States Senator. I was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University in England. I played professional basketball for the New York Knicks. Do you know who I am?" And Bradley said, the waiter drew himself up to his full 5'4" and said, "Sir, I know who you are, but do you know who I am? I'm the man with the butter. You can't buy authority. You can't be born into it. You can't inherit it. You can't be elected to it or ordained to it. You can't be fathered or mothered into authority. Sometimes authority comes from a power that is difficult to define, not a power that wields authority to dominate, to bend the will of people, but authority that attracts others to it like bits of metal are attracted to a magnet. For these last 2 weeks, thousands and thousands of Americans, and indeed thousands of people all around the world, have taken to the streets. Some people say that they are defying authority, but I think there's nothing more American than standing up or kneeling for justice. The arc of justice curves slowly, but it bends inevitably toward the will and justice for all people. 2,000 years ago, a man stood against authority. He said things like, "Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you." And he paid the price. In his life and in his death, he paid the price. But his death changed the world. 2 weeks ago, a man was lying on the ground and he said, "I cannot breathe." His death also has the potential to change our hearts. One death changed our lives forever. This death can change our country if we are willing to kneel, if we're willing to stand for justice in this moment of crisis.